May 23, 1944. Liri Valley, Italy. Dawn emerges slowly over the valley, not with light, but with sound. Artillery rumbles like distant thunder. Engines idle beneath camouflage nets. Somewhere ahead, German anti-tank guns wait in silence, their barrels already aligned with the narrow roads cutting through the fields. This is not Normandy. This is not the open desert of North Africa. This is terrain where tanks are meant to perish. The Germans understand it. They constructed their defenses around that belief. The Adolf Hitler line is not merely concrete and steel. It is geography weaponized. Rivers, ridges, stone villages, minefields. Every feature intended to slow armor, channel it, and annihilate it at close range. And yet on this morning, Canadian tanks are preparing to advance. At the heart of this operation is Bert Hofmeister, commander of the 5th Canadian Armored Division. He is not shouting orders from the front of a jeep. He is not giving speeches. He studies maps, listens to reports, and waits for the moment when pressure must be applied, not recklessly, but relentlessly. Hofmeister does not believe in dramatic breakthroughs. He believes in systems. By 1944, the German army in Italy is no inexperienced adversary. These are seasoned formations, many veterans of earlier campaigns, now engaged in a defensive war they understand intimately. They know how to trade ground for time. They know how to bleed an attacker without exposing themselves to annihilation. And they expect the Canadians to repeat the mistakes others have made. They expect tanks to charge forward and die. What unnerves them is that this does not occur. Instead, Canadian armor advances cautiously, always linked to infantry, engineers, and artillery. Roads are probed, not rushed. Villages are isolated before being entered. When resistance stiffens, Hofmeister does not double down. He pauses, shifts weight, and returns from a different angle. This is not the type of opponent German reports like to describe. It is difficult to categorize, difficult to anticipate. The Germans do not fear Hofmeister because he is reckless. They fear him because he is patient. As the Hitler line begins to fracture under sustained pressure, it becomes evident that this is not a one-time success. Rome will fall. The German army will withdraw north, not in panic, but by design. New defensive lines already await in the mountains ahead. For many Allied commanders, this would mark the beginning of frustration, a sense that victory keeps slipping just out of reach. For Hofmeister, it is simply the next stage. Over the coming months, his division will push through terrain that favors the defender at every step. They will be slowed by rivers that flood overnight, by roads turned to mud, by positions the Germans abandon only after exacting a price. There will be days when progress is measured in yards, days when the advance halts entirely, and still the pressure persists. This is why German commanders begin to take note, not because they are being defeated spectacularly, but because they cannot rest. Every time they establish a new line, Canadian armor appears again, methodical and intact, forcing another withdrawal sooner than anticipated. At the same time, across Allied headquarters, a different reputation is forming. British and American officers do not see Hofmeister as a showman. They see something more valuable. A commander whose units arrive where expected, who does not collapse under pressure, who does not create chaos for those fighting beside him. He is not invincible, but he is dependable. And in a war of attrition fought across mountains and rivers, reliability becomes a weapon. This is not the story of a legendary duel between tank aces. It is the story of why the German army learned to respect and quietly fear a Canadian general who never gave them what they desired. And why for Britain and the United States, Bert Hofmeister became a man they trusted to hold the line, push it forward, and never lose control when everything else threatened to unravel. June 1944, Central Italy. By now, German headquarters no longer asks whether the Canadians will attack. The question is how and from where. For the German army in Italy, fear does not arrive as panic. It arrives as irritation, as unease, as the growing realization that familiar defensive patterns are no longer yielding familiar results. This is the essence of the challenge posed by Bert Hofmeister. German officers are trained to recognize reckless adversaries. They know how to defeat speed without coordination. They know how to lure tanks into kill zones, bleed infantry unsupported by armor, and punish commanders who chase momentum instead of control. Hofmeister does none of that. What unnerves German reports is not Canadian aggression. It is Canadian restraint. In German doctrine, hesitation is weakness. A pause usually signals confusion, disorganization, or loss of nerve. But when Hofmeister pauses, something different occurs. The artillery intensifies. Engineers appear. Infantry probes widen. German forward observers suddenly find themselves under pressure from directions they were not monitoring minutes before. The pause is not hesitation. It is preparation. This pattern repeats continuously. Canadian armor does not surge forward after success, exposing itself to counterattack. It consolidates. It secures gains. It denies the Germans the opportunity to restore balance. Where German commanders expect a rush, they encounter a wall of controlled pressure. From the German perspective, this is profoundly unsettling. Their defensive doctrine in Italy depends on rhythm: attack, counterattack, withdrawal, delay. Hofmeister disrupts that rhythm. He does not react emotionally to resistance. He does not escalate blindly. Instead, he absorbs resistance and turns it into information. German counterattacks carefully plan to hit advancing armor. In moments of overextension arrive to find Canadians waiting. Holes dug in. Infantry already positioned, artillery pre-registered. What should have been decisive blows become costly gestures. This is when the fear changes character. It is no longer fear of defeat. It is fear of inefficiency. German commanders begin to realize that every kilometer defended against Hofmeister costs more than expected. More ammunition, more time, more men. Defensive lines meant to hold for days begin to dissolve in hours. Not because they are smashed apart, but because they are rendered untenable. Villages are not stormed head-on. They are isolated. Supply routes are cut. Observation posts are blinded. When the Germans finally withdraw, they do so not under catastrophe, but under certainty. The certainty that staying longer will only increase losses. This is the worst kind of opponent for a defensive army. Hofmeister does not seek to destroy German units outright. He seeks to make their positions meaningless. German officers notice something else as well. Canadian units under Hofmeister do not appear exhausted in the way others do. They do not arrive at the next line scattered or disorganized. Their formations remain coherent, their command structure intact, their tempo steady. That steadiness is dangerous. In Italy, German strategy relies on wearing the attacker down. Mountains, rivers, mud, and weather are meant to exhaust Allied forces faster than German reserves are depleted. Hofmeister reverses that equation. By refusing to gamble his armor, he preserves combat power. By refusing to chase dramatic breakthroughs, he ensures continuity. This creates a psychological problem for the German command. Every withdrawal is supposed to buy time. Every new line is supposed to restore control. Against Hofmeister, withdrawals buy less time than planned. New lines feel weaker than the last. The sense of control erodus. German after-action reports do not describe chaos. They describe frustration. They note that Canadian armor reappears intact. That attacks resume sooner than expected. That pressure does not ease even when the terrain favors the defense. Fear in this context is professional respect sharpened by discomfort. The Germans begin to understand that Hofmeister will not give them what they want. He will not overextend. He will not collapse under pressure. He will not trade long-term effectiveness for short-term glory. This makes him difficult to manipulate. Traditional defensive tricks, feigned Withdrawals, baited counterattacks, sudden armored thrusts achieve diminishing returns. Hofmeister adapts faster than the Germans can reset. Each encounter teaches his division something new, and those lessons are applied immediately. German commanders are used to opponents who repeat mistakes. Hofmeister does not repeat them. The fear grows quietly, embedded in planning. Meetings and staff discussions. It appears as caution, as requests for more. Artillery support, as reluctance to commit reserves too early or too late. Decision-making slows, not because commanders are incompetent, but because they are no longer confident they understand the enemy. That uncertainty is corrosive. Hofmeister does not need to win spectacular victories to create it. He only needs to be consistent. By mid-1944, the German army in Italy recognizes that the Canadians under Hofmeister are not a temporary problem. They are a persistent one, a formation that cannot be easily shaken loose, a commander who does not lose control when friction increases. This is why German fear of Hofmeister never becomes dramatic. There are no frantic orders, no desperate retreats attributed to him alone. Instead, there is something worse. A quiet acknowledgement that wherever Hofmeister's division appears, the defensive timetable shortens. That plans must be revised downward. That the margin for error narrows. Fear in war is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the knowledge that the enemy will arrive again. Tomorrow, organized, deliberate, and ready, no matter how hard today was meant to stop him. And that knowledge is exactly what Hofmeister imposes on the German army in Italy. May 23, 1944. WWII Valley, Italy. The valley is already awake when the first Canadian guns open fire. Not awake with movement, but with tension. The Adolf Hitler line lies ahead. Germany's last major prepared defensive belt south of Rome. Concrete bunkers sunk deep into the earth. Interlocking fields of fire, minefields mapped and remapped. Anti-tank guns dug in where roads narrow and armor must slow. For the German command, this line is not meant to be dramatic. It is meant to work. They do not expect it to be unbreakable forever. They expect it to cost time and blood. While the German 10th Army prepares its next withdrawal north, the terrain of the WWII Valley favors that plan perfectly. Flat ground funnels armor. Low ridges offer observation. Rivers complicate movement. Villages anchor strong points. For most armored commanders, this is a nightmare. For Bert Hofmeister, it is a problem to be disassembled. Hofmeister understands immediately that this will not be decided by speed. The Hitler line cannot be rushed. Any attempt to punch straight through with tanks will feed German gunners exactly what they want. Instead, his division is committed in layers. Armor never alone. Infantry never unsupported, engineers always close. The first advances are deliberately cautious. Probing attacks test German responses. Where fire erupts instantly, Canadians pull back. Where resistance is uneven, pressure increases. Artillery is not used to shock, but to suppress and blind, forcing German observers to move or fall silent. From the German side, this is unsettling. They are ready for a charge. They are not ready for patience. As the day unfolds, the valley becomes a chessboard. German units counterattack where they believe Canadian armor has exposed itself, only to discover infantry already dug in and guns already registered. What should have been clean defensive victories become expensive stalemates. Progress is slow, sometimes painfully slow. There are hours when nothing seems to move at all. This is where Hofmeister makes his most important decision. He does not escalate recklessly. He does not order a frontal push to get things moving. Instead, he shifts the weight of the division. New axes of advance appear where German attention has thinned. Engineers breach obstacles that were not meant to be breached so soon. Infantry infiltrates villages expected to hold another day. The Hitler line begins to lose coherence, not because it collapses, but because it can no longer function as a system. German commanders are forced into a choice they hoped to delay: stay and absorb mounting losses or withdraw before the line becomes a trap. Either option is costly. Staying risks encirclement. Leaving abandons prepared positions that took months to construct. By the second day, it is clear that the line is no longer buying the time it was designed to buy. Canadian armor begins to appear behind positions that should still be secure. Roads once thought covered are suddenly threatened. German reserves are committed earlier than planned, not to counterattack decisively, but simply to stabilize the front. That stabilization never comes. Hofmeister's division does not surge forward in triumph. It advances deliberately, consolidating each gain. When resistance stiffens, pressure shifts elsewhere. The Germans are denied the opportunity to restore balance. This is not the dramatic breakthrough German doctrine fears. It is something more damaging. The Hitler line ceases to function as a line. By May 24, German units begin pulling back in stages, not in panic, not in collapse, but with the clear understanding that holding longer will only increase losses without changing the outcome. The valley that was meant to bleed the attacker dry has instead forced the defender to retreat sooner than planned. For Hofmeister, the result is not celebrated loudly. Rome is still ahead. New defensive positions already loom in the distance. But something important has happened. The German command has learned that its strongest prepared defenses are vulnerable to a kind of pressure they find difficult to counter. Not reckless assault, not overwhelming speed, but controlled methodical advance. In German reports, the Canadians are no longer described as merely competent. They are described as persistent. Their armor does not vanish after contact. Their units do not unravel after resistance. Each attack seems to make the next one more effective. The Hitler line was supposed to be a demonstration of German defensive mastery. Instead, it becomes a warning. For the first time in Italy, German commanders understand that the Canadians under Hofmeister are not just another Allied formation passing through their sector. They are a force that learns quickly and applies those lessons immediately. As German forces withdraw north toward Rome, they do so with discipline intact, but confidence shaken. They have not been crushed. They have not been routed. But they have been forced to move before they were ready. And in a defensive war, that is the beginning of something far more dangerous than defeat. For Hofmeister, WWII Valley is not the end of the story. It is the proof of concept. What works here, patience, coordination, pressure without panic, will be carried forward into every river, ridge, and defensive line that follows. The Germans will not forget that lesson. They will feel it again, sooner than they expect. June 4, 1944, Rome falls. For the German army in Italy, this is not a moment of collapse. It is a scheduled transition. The loss of Rome is symbolic, not decisive. German formations withdraw northward in good order, executing what their doctrine does best, a fighting withdrawal. Bridges are blown after the last units cross. Rear guards delay, disengage, and vanish. Every river, ridge, and village becomes a temporary barrier designed to consume Allied time. From the outside, it can look like retreat. From the inside, it is a calculation. German commanders know they cannot hold Rome. What they intend to do instead is Control the pace of pursuit, slow it, fragment it, and exhaust the attacker before the next major defensive line. This is where many offensives lose their momentum. For armored forces, especially, pursuit is dangerous. Tanks outrun infantry. Supply lines stretch. Units arrive piecemeal. The defender turns retreat into opportunity. But under Bert Hofmeister, that opportunity never fully materializes. Hofmeister understands exactly what the Germans are doing. He does not mistake withdrawal for weakness. He does not order reckless advances to keep the pressure on. Instead, he treats the retreat as a series of deliberate tests. Each German delaying action, revealing where resistance will harden next. Canadian armor moves forward carefully, never detached from infantry or engineers. When German rear guards make a stand, Hofmeister does not force a decisive engagement. He contains them, bypasses when possible, and denies them the satisfaction of inflicting disproportionate losses. This frustrates German planning. The purpose of a fighting withdrawal is not merely to move backward. It is to shape the enemy's behavior, to tempt them forward too quickly, to make them careless, to draw them into traps that restore the defender's initiative. Hofmeister refuses the invitation. Progress after Rome is steady but unspectacular. Some days the advance measures miles. Other days it measures nothing at all. Rivers flood overnight. Roads dissolve into mud. German artillery fires just enough to remind the Canadians that the enemy remains dangerous. Yet the German timetable begins to slip. Positions meant to hold for several days are abandoned after one. Rear guards that expect to disengage cleanly find their withdrawal routes threatened sooner than planned. Canadian units arrive intact, coordinated, and ready to apply pressure again almost immediately. For German commanders, this is deeply unsettling. They are not losing control in dramatic fashion, but they are losing time. Every withdrawal is supposed to buy space to reorganize. Every delay is meant to stretch Allied logistics and fatigue advancing units. Against Hofmeister, the calculus changes. The Canadians do not surge forward exhausted. They arrive composed. Their command structure remains intact. Their formations retain coherence. This creates a subtle psychological shift. German officers begin planning withdrawals earlier than they would prefer. Not because they are panicking, but because they are uncertain. Uncertain how quickly the Canadians will reappear. Uncertain whether a delaying position will still be viable tomorrow. That uncertainty is corrosive. The German army in Italy still fights effectively. Its discipline holds. Its formations do not disintegrate. But the confidence that once underpinned its defensive rhythm begins to erode. For Hofmeister, this phase of the campaign is not about headlines or breakthroughs. It is about denial. Denying the enemy the ability to reset. Denying them the illusion of control. Denying them the satisfaction of a successful delay. Each river crossed, each ridge taken reinforces the same message. Withdrawal will not buy enough time. By midsummer 1944, German forces have not been destroyed, but they have been pushed into a narrowing set of options. The mountains of northern Italy loom ahead. Prepared defenses await. The Gothic line is taking shape. And yet, even as German units move toward it, something has changed. They no longer assume the attacker will arrive disorganized. They no longer expect a pause long enough to restore balance. They no longer trust that terrain alone will save them. Hofmeister has done something dangerous without winning a single spectacular battle. He has proven that pressure can be sustained without collapse. That pursuit can be disciplined. that armor can move forward without losing its mind. For the German command, this is the most troubling realization of all. They are not facing an army that will break itself against their defenses. They are facing one that will arrive again, measured, intact, and prepared. No matter how carefully the retreat is conducted, the German army is still fighting, still organized, still lethal. But the space it needs to recover is shrinking. And ahead, waiting in the mountains, is a defensive line that must now stop an enemy who has already learned how to deny retreat its purpose. The Gothic line will test both sides. And for the first time, the Germans are no longer certain it will test the Canadians more than it tests them. August 30th, 1944. The Gothic line, Adriatic front, northern Italy. If the campaign so far has been about pressure, then this is where pressure meets intent. The Gothic line is not a single wall. It is a philosophy, a system of defenses layered across ridges, rivers, villages, and mountain passes, stretching from the Tyrrhenian Sea to the Adriatic. It is designed not to stop an enemy outright, but to consume him, to slow him, fracture him, and force him to spend men and time he cannot afford. For the German army, this is where the retreat is supposed to end. For Bert Hofmeister, this is where everything he has learned must now work or fail. The terrain immediately asserts itself. Narrow valleys funnel movement. High ground dominates every approach. Roads run like exposed veins beneath German observation. Tanks cannot maneuver freely. Infantry advances under constant artillery fire. Every position is mutually supporting. Every withdrawal planned in advance. This is not the kind of battlefield that rewards speed. It rewards judgment. Hofmeister understands that the Gothic line cannot be broken in a dramatic sense. Any attempt to force a decisive breakthrough will simply hand the Germans what they want: exhausted armor, isolated infantry, and a chance to restore control through counterattack. Instead, he approaches the line as a problem of attrition and denial. The opening attacks are deliberate. Canadian units push forward into the first layers of defense, fully expecting to be slowed. When resistance stiffens, Hofmeister does not escalate blindly. He pauses, reweights his forces, and probes again, always seeking to identify where German defenses are strongest, and, more importantly, where they are weakest. From the German perspective, this is exhausting. Their defensive doctrine relies on rhythm. Attackers push, defenders absorb. Counterattacks restore balance. Withdrawals reset the line. Hofmeister refuses to follow that rhythm. He interrupts it. Canadian armor does not surge into every gap. It consolidates. Infantry does not chase fleeing defenders. It secures ground. Engineers work continuously, breaching obstacles the Germans expected to hold longer. Artillery fires not to shock, but to suppress and isolate. The effect is cumulative. German commanders find themselves forced to commit reserves earlier than planned, not to defeat an assault, but simply to prevent collapse. Positions designed to hold for days are abandoned after hours, not because they are overwhelmed, but because their purpose has been exhausted too quickly. This is the true duel of the Gothic line. Not a clash of tanks, but a clash of thinking. The Germans still fight skillfully. Their withdrawals are orderly. Their counterattacks remain sharp. When opportunities appear, they strike hard. Canadian units take losses. Advances stall. There are days when progress halts entirely. Hofmeister does not panic. Stalling is not failure. It is information. Each pause reveals where German resistance is concentrated. Each counterattack exposes the limits of German reserves. Hofmeister absorbs these lessons and applies them immediately. When the advance resumes, it does so with slightly altered weight, slightly adjusted priorities. From the outside, the campaign appears slow, frustratingly slow. But beneath the surface, the German defensive system is being worn down faster than it can be repaired. The Canadians advance not because the Germans collapse, but because the Germans are forced to choose where to give ground, and each choice costs them options. Nowhere is this clearer than in the brutal fighting around ridges and river lines leading toward the Adriatic coast. The Germans defend every approach with determination, fully aware that once forced back, the next line will be harder to hold. Hofmeister's division does not rush these positions. It pressures them from multiple directions, denies clean disengagements, and forces withdrawals that are technically successful but strategically damaging. German commanders begin to sense the trap. They are doing everything right and it is still not enough. The Gothic line was meant to exhaust the attacker before winter. Instead, it begins to exhaust the defender first, not through catastrophic losses, but through constant decision-making under pressure. Every day requires choices. Every choice reduces flexibility. For the German command, this is deeply uncomfortable. Their strength lies in controlled, methodical defense. Hofmeister forces them into reactive decisions. Not chaotic, but increasingly constrained. By mid-September, the Gothic line has not been destroyed. It has not collapsed. But it has failed in its strategic purpose. The Canadians, alongside other Allied formations, have forced the Germans north again, sooner than planned. And with less rest than intended. The defensive system remains intact on paper, but its margins are gone. Hofmeister's reputation solidifies. Here, not as a man who smashes lines, but as a commander who consumes them. British and American officers watching the campaign take note. They see that Canadian units under Hofmeister remain coherent even after weeks of hard fighting. They arrive on new lines organized. They do not require long pauses to recover command and control. They are not brittle. That reliability matters. For the Germans, the lesson is harsher. The Gothic line was supposed to be the answer to Allied pressure. Instead, it reveals a new problem. An enemy commander who understands how to fight a defensive army on its own terms and deny it the time it needs to survive. Winter approaches, the rains begin. Rivers swell. Mud replaces dust. The fighting slows, but it does not stop. The duel of the Gothic line ends without a dramatic finale. No surrender, no collapse, just another withdrawal. Executed professionally but under growing strain. For Hofmeister, that is enough. The Gothic line has tested him and found that he does not break under complexity. He adapts to it. For the German army, the conclusion is quietly unsettling. They have faced aggressive commanders before. They have faced reckless ones. They have faced brilliant tacticians. What troubles them now is something rarer. A commander who understands that in a war of defenses and delays, the most dangerous weapon is not speed, but control. And that is a weapon Bert Hofmeister wields with unsettling precision. September 1944, Allied Headquarters, Italy. Respect among senior commanders is rarely spoken aloud. It is inferred from who is trusted with exposed flanks, who is given difficult sectors, and whose units are asked to keep moving when others must pause. By late 1944, this is where Bert Hofmeister stands in the eyes of British and American commanders in Italy. Not as a celebrity. Not as a headline maker, but as a safe pair of hands in a campaign where Mistakes are unforgiving. The British Army, shaped by years of coalition warfare, values predictability above bravado. Commanders want to know that a unit will be where it is supposed to be, doing what it said it would do when the situation inevitably deteriorates. Hofmeister provides exactly that. When British formations operate alongside Canadian armor under Hofmeister, there are fewer surprises and fewer emergencies. His units do not surge forward and leave gaps. They do not collapse under pressure and require rescue. They maintain alignment with neighboring formations even when terrain and weather make coordination difficult. That reliability builds trust. British officers notice something else as well. Hofmeister does not compete for credit. He does not push his division forward to claim ground at the expense of the larger plan. When pauses are necessary, he accepts them. When pressure must be applied, he applies it without drama. In a coalition environment, that restraint matters as much as aggression. American commanders watching from adjacent sectors and through liaison reports come to a similar conclusion but for slightly different reasons. The U.S. Army places a premium on momentum, on keeping the advance moving, on exploiting opportunity before the enemy can recover. What they observe in Hofmeister is a commander who understands momentum but refuses to confuse it with speed. Canadian armor under Hofmeister does not stall because of chaos. When it stalls, it is because the situation demands it. And when it moves again, it does so intact. For American planners, that consistency is invaluable. It means fewer emergency reallocations, fewer improvised fixes, fewer moments where one unit's overreach creates another unit's crisis. Hofmeister's division becomes a known quantity in an uncertain campaign. This reputation is not built on a single dramatic victory. It is built on weeks and months of not failing, of absorbing pressure without unraveling, of maintaining command and control under conditions that break less disciplined formations. In Italy, that is no small achievement. The terrain punishes error. Rivers flood overnight. Roads vanish into mud. Communications fail. Units lose contact. Under these conditions, even competent commanders can lose grip on their formations. Hofmeister does not. His headquarters functions efficiently. Orders are clear. Adjustments are made without panic. When mistakes occur, and they do, they are corrected quickly without cascading into wider disorder. British and American officers noticed that when Hofmeister's division finishes a phase of fighting, it does not need to be rebuilt. It needs rest, but not reorganization. That distinction matters. In a campaign defined by attrition, commanders who preserve combat power are more valuable than those who expend it for dramatic effect. Hofmeister consistently delivers formations that remain usable, deployable, and dependable. There is another reason for Allied respect, one that is harder to quantify. Hofmeister understands coalition warfare instinctively. He communicates clearly with British and American counterparts. He respects boundaries. He does not undermine neighboring units by creating unrealistic expectations or forcing them to adapt to his mistakes. When coordination fails, he works to fix it quietly rather than assigning blame. That professionalism earns him credibility. By late 1944, when Allied commanders discuss difficult sectors or sensitive operations, Hofmeister's name carries weight. Not because he promises miracles, but because he does not promise what he cannot deliver. This stands in contrast to more flamboyant figures within the Allied command structure. Aggressive commanders can achieve spectacular results and spectacular failures. Hofmeister's style is less visible but more sustainable. For the British, that makes him dependable. For the Americans, it makes him trustworthy. And for both, it makes him valuable. It is telling that Hofmeister is not remembered for clashes with Allied superiors or for controversial decisions that disrupted larger plans. His legacy is quieter. He fits into the Allied machine without friction and keeps it moving under strain. That is not accidental. Hofmeister understands that coalition success depends less on individual brilliance than on compatibility. On the ability to operate inside a system without tearing it apart. His command style reinforces cohesion rather than testing its limits. As the campaign grinds on into autumn and winter, this quality becomes increasingly important. Operations slow. Weather worsens, tempers shorten, pressure mounts. In such conditions, unreliable commanders become liabilities. Hofmeister does not. British and American officers come to see him as someone who will not surprise them at the worst possible moment. Someone who will not gamble their flanks for personal gain. Someone who will not lose control when the battlefield refuses to cooperate. That is why respect for Hofmeister does not need to be declared. It is demonstrated through continued trust, continued cooperation, and continued reliance. The Germans fear him because he denies them advantage. The British and Americans respect him because he denies chaos. In the brutal arithmetic of coalition warfare, that combination is rare. And by the time the campaign in Italy enters its final phase, Bert Hofmeister has become something far more important than a celebrated general. He has become someone the Allied command can count on. When counting on someone is the difference between progress and disaster. May 2, 1945. Northern Italy. The war in Italy ends not with a final thunderous battle, but with exhaustion. German forces lay down their arms. Defensive lines that once consumed months of planning dissolve in a matter of days. The long campaign through mountains, rivers, and mud comes to a close. For Bert Hofmeister, there is no single moment of triumph, no dramatic photograph, no defining quote delivered to history. And that, in many ways, is the point. Hofmeister does not leave behind a legend built on spectacle. He leaves behind something less visible, but more enduring, a record of decisions that held together when the war consistently tried to pull formations apart. He was never undefeated. He was never flawless. He never pretended to be either. What distinguishes Hofmeister is not that he avoided setbacks, but that setbacks never destroyed his command. When attacks stalled, his division did not unravel. When terrain favored the defender, his formations did not bleed themselves dry for appearances. When pressure increased, control remained. In Italy, that mattered more than brilliance. The German army did not fear Hofmeister because he annihilated them. They feared him because he denied them recovery. Because every line they built bought less time than expected. Because every withdrawal delivered them into contact with a force that arrived intact, deliberate, and prepared to apply pressure again. British and American commanders respected him for the same reason. In a coalition war where coordination failures can be as deadly as enemy fire, Hofmeister was a stabilizing force. His division did not create crises for others to solve. It absorbed friction rather than exporting it. That reliability made him valuable in ways that are rarely celebrated, but always remembered by those who depend on it. When the war ends, Hofmeister does not become a household name. There are no myths built around his personality, no simplified stories that turn him into a symbol larger than the campaign itself. Instead, his legacy lives in quieter places. In the way Canadian armor learned to fight as part of a system rather than as an isolated arm, in the Way pressure, not speed, became the defining feature of effective advance. In the understanding that winning a defensive war against a skilled enemy requires patience as much as courage. Italy was not a theater that rewarded theatrics. It punished impatience. It revealed commanders who pursued momentum at the expense of control. Hofmeister survived it not because he forced the campaign to his will, but because he adjusted himself to its realities. That adaptability is his true legacy. Long after the guns fall silent, the lessons persist. That leadership is not measured by how loudly it proclaims itself, but by how reliably it performs under pressure. That fear and respect can emerge from the same source. Competence applied without ego. Hofmeister did not reinvent warfare. He refined the way it was executed. And in doing so, he presented the German army with a problem it could not easily solve and gave Britain and the United States something far more valuable than inspiration. He gave them assurance. In the end, that is why Bert Hofmeister matters. Not because he became a legend, but because he left behind a model of command under pressure, of discipline without inflexibility, and of leadership that functions when conditions are at their harshest. In a war filled with noise, his legacy is quiet. And that quiet is precisely what makes it endure.